Okay, so today we're going to learn how to solve using square roots and how to solve by completing the square. So this example right here, I just have kind of changed. I want to give you a different one. So let's scratch it out and just rewrite instead. Let's do x squared minus 16x plus 64 and equals 100. Okay, so how you solve by square roots is you can only use this method if you have just x squared, or if you have x squared and x but you can factor it to a perfect square, this will work. So let's try it real quick. And I know this goes against everything we've said, but let's go ahead and let's factor just the left side, that x squared minus 16x plus 64. So we're just factoring this left side right here. So what multiplies to 64 and adds to negative 16, and that's going to be negative 8 and negative 8. So we're going to do x squared minus 8x plus 64. So when you factor that, you get x minus 8 times x minus 8, which is x minus 8 squared, and it's still equal to 100. So in this case, I can go ahead then and solve by square roots. So if I square root both sides, I get x minus 8 equals the square root of 100 is plus or minus 10. So then I add the 8 over. I'm going to come up here for the sake of space. So I get x equals 8 plus or minus 10. Now, that's very easy to go ahead and figure out the two answers. So 8 plus 10 is 18, and 8 minus 10 is negative 2. So your two answers are 18 and negative 2. Okay, so over here, same thing. So in this case, we want to know what multiplies to 4 and adds to 4. So that's going to be 2 and 2. So remember, you can use this method when you can factor the trinomial to be a perfect square trinomial. So I get 4x squared, and here's the plus 1, and then I need to use the 2x and the 2x. So this factors to 2x plus 1 times 2x plus 1. So you have 2x plus 1 squared equals 0. Okay, now solve by square roots, square root both sides. So you get 2x plus 1 equals 0. There's no negative 0, so now you can solve. You subtract the 1 and divide by 2. So you have one solution, which is x equals negative 1/2. Okay, so what do we do when it doesn't factor, or when it doesn't factor to a perfect square? So we do what's called completing the square. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move the c value over to the other side. So I'm going to subtract 40. Okay, now I am going to actually try to factor this and figure out what number I would need to make a perfect square. So I put the x squared in the top left box. Now, this minus 12x, the b value, I split up evenly into 2. So I put minus 6x and minus 6x. That still makes negative 12x. And the reason I do this is because when I factor, I'll get x minus 6 and x minus 6. I need those to be the same so it is a perfect square. So what it means to complete the square is literally what number goes right here that would make this be a perfect square. So this is negative 6 times negative 6. So this number is a positive 36. So if you want to fill that number in on the left, that's fine. But to keep the equation balanced, you also have to do the same thing on the right. So that turns into x minus 6 times x minus 6. And then negative 40 plus 36 is negative 4. Now, x minus 6 times itself is x minus 6 squared. So you just completed the square, which means you were able to write it as a perfect square trinomial. All right, so now to solve by square rooting, we square root both sides. We get x minus 6 equals plus or minus, and the square root of negative 4 is 2i. Now let's add the 6 to the other side. So we get 6 plus or minus 2i. So your solutions are 6 plus 2i and 6 minus 2i. Okay, let's go ahead and try this again. So remember, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and move the c value over to the other side of the equation so that we just have some room to work. Okay, so now we need to complete the square. So we're going to take the x squared and put it in the top left box. And we're going to take the b value, the minus 5x, and we're going to divide it into two boxes. Now, I'm going to keep this as a fraction because it's going to help me later, because I know that I have this 21/4 over here in a fraction, so I probably want to stay as a fraction in this case instead of negative 2.5. So if you were to factor this out, it's x minus 5 halves and x minus 5 halves. So to figure out the number that will complete the square right here, you take negative 5 halves times negative 5 halves, and that's positive 25/4. So that's the number that completes the square, but remember, to keep the equation balanced, you also have to add it to the other side or you've unbalanced your equation. Okay, so now this becomes x minus 5/2 squared. And on the right side, negative 21/4 plus 25/4 is 4/4, which is 1. Okay, so to solve, we're going to square root both sides. I'm going to come down here just for space. So I have x minus 5/2, and the square root of 1 is plus or minus 1. So now we're going to add the 5/2. So we get we get 5/2 plus or minus 1. Okay, so now we can write that as 5/2 plus 1, which is 7/2 or 3.5. And we can write it as 5/2 minus 1, which is 3/2 or 1.5. So I'm just going to leave them as fractions, but you could do 3.5 and 1.5, and those would be our two solutions for this equation.